Some news has broken since we've been on the air, and we have the three most perfect people to talk to about it. Let me read a little bit from a story just dropped by the Wall Street Journal. Quote, Wall Street Journal, Russia is sharing satellite imagery and drone technology with Iran. Moscow has expanded intelligence sharing and military cooperation to help keep Tehran in the fight against the United States and Israeli military might. I'll read a little bit of this and then ask you all to help us make sense of this. Russia has been expanding its intelligence sharing and military cooperation with Iran, providing satellite imagery and improved drone technology to aid Tehran's targeting of U.S. forces in the region. Russia is trying to keep its closest Mideast partner in the fight against the United States and Israeli military might and prolong a war that is benefiting Russia militarily and economically. They explain the technology, but the bottom line here seems to be that Iran has aided Russia so much in its fight against Ukraine that it is now Russia is now aiding Iran to scratch their back in return in a war against America. Director Brennan, do I have that right?
Yes, the Iranians provided some real support to the Russians as far as the Shahed drone technology that the Russians are now producing on their own. And it's very unsurprising that the Russians are helping the Iranians now. And certainly, I think U.S. intelligence would have forecast that before this war started, that Iran was likely to provide any type of intelligence support that it could, in addition to maybe enhanced components for the drone technology, since the Russians, I think, have upgraded some of those capabilities. But by providing satellite imagery, signals intelligence derived from those Russian capabilities, which are quite formidable, the Iranians can have a much better chance of successfully targeting the U.S. as well as Gulf Arab sites throughout the Gulf. So that Russian support, I think, is pretty significant from the standpoint of helping the Iranians do much better job using their capabilities that they have to target effectively those sites, those targets, maybe even U.S. naval vessels in the Gulf. And so the question is whether or not the White House is going to raise any concerns with the Russians about this. It doesn't seem like they have done that so far.
I mean, Tom Nichols just made the point about Donald Trump's consistency. I mean, and the consistent slobbering over Vladimir Putin, including an actual red carpet that Donald Trump rolled out for him since he's been president a second time. You have to look at that differently when you take in the fact that this is not static. This is dynamic. This has changed even since the summer. Let me read this to you from the Wall Street Journal. Quote, Iran has had greater success targeting United States and Gulf state military assets in this war than it did during last year's 12-day war. The country's strikes using drones to overwhelm radar before a missile strike look very similar to Russia's tactics in Ukraine, according to military analysts.
It's a mistake to imagine that Iran is a country all by itself fighting alone against the United States and Israel. Iran is part of a network of autocracies. Actually, it had very close relations with Venezuela in the past, which may or may not continue. It has close relations with China. In fact, there's evidence that the Iranians have been allowing Chinese ships through the Strait of Hormuz, even though they're preventing European and other ships from going through. And so it's really not surprising that the Iranians should be working closely with the Russians, to whom they, in turn, supplied drones and drone technology early in the war in Ukraine. So it's the idea that Iran would somehow be alone, that we could overwhelm them. I think the Trump administration has misunderstood the degree to which autocracies work together, work in collaboration, and are willing to help one another when they see that they have mutual interests. And here they do. The Russians have an interest in raising the oil price. They have an interest in keeping the United States occupied. They have an interest in embarrassing the American president. And they'll continue to help Iran as long as they see that that they're getting something out of it.
I mean, the Wall Street Journal goes on to detail just how they have Donald Trump's fate in their hands. Wall Street Journal writes this, quote, the aid Russia can give Iran has been limited not only by its own ongoing conflict in Ukraine, but also by the Kremlin's reluctance to anger Trump. While Moscow could do much more to turn the dial up on its assistance to Iran, its current aid plays an important, albeit limited, role in helping Iran's war effort. The categories of assistance, including satellite data and advice on drone tactics that Russia is providing, are limited but still valuable to the war and Iran's ability to hit specific military sites. I mean, Tom Nichols, we've seen Putin and Trump together enough. You can imagine the conversation. You be nice to me or else I will, to quote the Wall Street Journal, turn the dial up.
Yeah, the only thing that would have been shocking is if the Russians weren't doing this. This is a layup for them. This is an easy call. It's cheap, it's simple, it's low risk, it's high impact. Any Kremlin that didn't do this, would have been incompetent. And let's also point something else out. Vladimir Putin has no respect for Donald Trump and really only cares about the United States insofar as we can complicate his life, and particularly in Ukraine. Trump has gotten it into his head that this is his pal, that they, work together, that they can work things out because Trump is a narcissistic egomaniac who really believes all this stuff about himself. And Putin and others are laughing at him. And I think Ann's point about how, these autocracies cooperate. They recognize their mutual interest. They don't make side deals. They're not interested in what Donald Trump thinks. They're interested in what works and what works for them and what keeps them alive. So, the fact that the Russians are doing this is no shock at all. And I think what you're going to see that the longer this conflict goes on, the Russians will up that, because just as we kind of boiled the frog in Ukraine by increasing our assistance to Ukraine, the Russians are going to play that same game and just keep turning up that dial the longer Donald Trump stays stuck where he is in Iran.
I mean, Ann, I've asked you on multiple occasions how Europe has sort of reoriented itself once Donald Trump came back and took sort of a bystander role in Ukraine. This is just a stunning public display of the consequences of America sort of taking itself off the field as an aggressive backer of our allies. What are the ramifications of this sort of being a new publicly known axis of Russia's fighting Ukraine and they're fighting America right now by aiding Iran? I mean, what could possibly drive our European allies further away from us?
So remember what this looks like to European allies. They've spent the last year being insulted, attacked, demeaned, patronized. Their security interests have been dismissed. Trump repeatedly talks about NATO as if the United States were not the founder and leader of NATO, as if NATO were not an American project created to benefit Americans and to create a zone of prosperity that has been good for Americans for many decades. They see and hear that. They remember it. The fact that Donald Trump doesn't remember it because he lives only in the present and he thinks only about what's good for him in any given moment, that's fine for him. But other people have longer historical memory. Other people understand, that actions have implications and that behavior in one circumstance affects thinking in another. Autocratic countries are able to see when they have mutual interests and they see the benefit in working together. Of course, they'll abandon one another too if they see the advantage of it. But Donald Trump has been unable to find common language with America's historic allies. He's been unable to search for common values and common projects, and now we see the result.